Today I'm joined by Zero HP Lovecraft, who is a science fiction writer, a horrorist, a prolific Twitter poster, and in my opinion, the unofficial king of Twitter. Yeah, I'm very glad to have you here.
Thanks. It's great to be here. I listened to your cast with Default Friend and Kashiwagi, so I'm excited.
Nice, excellent. Yeah, I mean, there's quite a little bit of backstory between me and your posts. I mean, we haven't met before. This is the first time we're talking, but it was kind of the first mover in me getting onto Twitter. I saw one of your threads probably last year in August, and it was a very good motivation to come on Twitter. And since then, a lot of stuff has happened. I mean, I wouldn't be doing this podcast. I would not be doing my Substack or doing anything, to be honest, very creative, if it wasn't for that thread. So I'm really excited to be talking to you.
Thank you. I almost feel like it's Groundhog Day, but I'm going to ask you which thread was it, if you don't, if you remember.
Yeah, this is, I mean, full disclosure, people listening to this, we've tried to record this once before. We had a little bit of technical issues, so we're kind of rehashing a conversation we've had before. But the thread that you're asking about is, I think, the thread where you say that people think society should be rewritten to make better men. But it's actually, would be more productive to have it, act upon women because they're the more imprintable sex. And obviously, this is not everything in that thread. It's just kind of how the thread starts. But what was really striking to me about that thread was, and the other threads, because once you start reading one of your threads, and you also have this cascading thing that you do where you reference threads and other threads, which is just kind of quite a masterful thing. But you kind of get really deep into it. And one thing that really surprised me was how the theory of mind that you built about women and how they think was something that it took me almost 30 years to build for myself. And I kind of saw that reflected in your work. So I mean, I guess my first question is like, how do you know so much about the inner machinations of women?
There's a flippant answer I'm tempted to give. If you've ever seen the movie As Good as It Gets, there's this amazing scene where Jack Nicholson is this writer of sort of like romantic novels, and a woman comes up to him and says, "How do you do it? How do you write from the soul of a woman?" And he says, "Well, I take a man and I remove all logic and accountability." That's a very insulting answer, and they use it to establish, this character is a dick. It's actually a really charming movie. I highly recommend it. It's about his sort of redemption arc, uh, as he like meets this woman and falls in love with her. And there's another scene which is sort of the flip of that, where he goes to dinner with his romantic interest, and she says, "You're such an asshole. All you do is say negative things. If you don't compliment me right now, this date is over." And so he starts into this story, and he explains how he hates taking pills because he's old. He's got, heart condition or something, he says. And she gets mad. She's like, "Well, you're not complimenting me. You're talking about your heart." He says, "No, wait, listen. Because I met you, I started taking my pills every day because you make me want to be a better man." And so I think these sort of two anecdotes really both describe the story of the movie and also, in some ways, my relationship to women uh, as a concept. That is, I, I get a lot of flack on Twitter, especially if people want to insult me. They say, "Oh, zero pussy Lovecraft." That's a common one that I hear. Very creative. They say I'm an incel. I'm not. But I live in a basement. Basements are pretty cozy. I don't see a problem, but I don't live in one. Uh, and there's sort of this idea that if you have an unorthodox view of women, you must be this kind of sexual loser. But and in fact, I think there's a little bit of truth to that, in that that's how it probably starts. Most people have an awkward adolescence. You know, this is very typical. You don't know how men and women work when you're a teenager. You have a lot of trouble relating to the opposite sex, and figuring that out is part of everyone's journey in life. So, yes, I had a pretty rocky time of it in high school. I don't think that's anything to be ashamed of. I maybe had more trouble figuring it out than a lot of others, so I had to go a lot deeper. And I read a lot of books and articles from the pickup artist community and from the red pill. There are some good and bad things about that. Like, there's a lot of really useful psychological insight in those communities, which is not scientifically proven, right? It doesn't have the imprimatur of institutional science, but it's borne out in a lot of anecdotes and analysis by people who are really, really motivated to solve a problem. They have skin in the game, as Taleb says. So the good part of it is building a model of sexuality, of relationships, of how both men and women think and what they want. And the bad part of it is a sort of a bitterness and an anger at women and often at the world, because these men want something so badly, and it's not something that can be had just by asking for it or by wanting it. So it's a constant frustration as well. And that breeds a lot of really awful emotions. And it's sort of the difference between the incel community as such, the people who call themselves incels. This is a horrible identity to assume. Mm-hmm. Why would you define yourself as a person who doesn't get sex? That's awful. Like, you should define yourself in positive ways. I think that's much better. But so part of it is that, and you can find these insights, some flavor of the insight in those places, whether it's Artiste or even some of Roosh's older stuff. Roosh, by the way, has a lot of really awful things that he wrote. I don't judge him for it. I think that was part of his own journey. But there's another side of it as well, which is not at all sort of forbidden. And it's three books that really sort of transformed the way I think about people and build a theory of mind. One is Irving Goffman, The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life. Mm-hmm. One is Eric Berne, The Games We Play,
yeah.
Which is, rooted in transactional analysis. And the third was Impro. I forget the author. Improvisation for Actors. And between these books, you develop a sort of sociological perspective of people as always performing, always playing games, and jockeying for this sort of invisible variable that we call status. And so the trick is to take some of those red pill pickup artist insights and filter them through this kind of Goffman, Eric Berne sort of axis, and try to understand it in terms of performance and in terms of games and transactions. It's really unpopular to think of social interactions transactionally, and I think it's unhealthy if you do it too much. I try not to relate to women transactionally. I think that's really, really bad. It's not a if you do that, you're talking about prostitution, not love, right? You can't be keeping score.
Yeah. I think it also depends how you define a transaction, because that's kind of a pushback I get as well, because I'm like, my background is like as an economist. That's kind of my interest as well, and I usually kind of resort to the lingo of economics when I kind of explain social phenomena, and people are like, yeah, you can't, this is reductive, and but a transaction is not necessarily in money. You could, it's give and take. That's essentially what a transaction is, and there has to be some value in a relationship there's always value. Some people say, oh, the unconditional love, maybe for your closest kin, but when you interact with people, outside of that, then there is some value exchange happening, and it doesn't necessarily have to be monetary, but there is something there.
Absolutely. The only, maybe the closest thing in the world to unconditional love is the love of a mother for her child. If the child is a serial killer, if the child does every horrible thing in the world, their mother will still love them generally. I think that's good. But beyond that, no, of course you have to provide value to the other person. It's not that you don't have to provide value, it's that you shouldn't be keeping an Excel spreadsheet of that value. There's an elasticity to that credit.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I mean, kind of referring back to your comment on pickup artistry. I mean, I've also perused the space, and kind of the MRA MGTOW space more, less so the pickup artistry, because I mean, I'm not necessarily technically interested in in how to do it, but it was interesting because you also had a thread about pickup artistry, and you were kind of uh, comparing it to I think it was an Asimov story, where someone kind of reverse
Yes.
engineers mathematics from some form of like cybernetic system. And I thought that was extremely good insight, and I think that that applies to a lot of things. This kind of cargo cultism that we have for so many spaces. Like, this is essentially the argument that Alistair McIntyre has in After Virtue, that we're essentially a cargo cult of natural law, of Christianity, and we there's not really any basis for morality. And this is also something I've kind of done. Because now I'm, I'm one of the trad Twitter people. I'm trad. I'm kind of like a Christian, and it's something I had to reverse engineer from rationalist principles. It wasn't something that I took for granted, but it took me, yeah, another 20 years to think my way into the practice of these things. So I think this is a phenomena that we're seeing in so many places. But I'm curious what your take is on that.
Uh, a few things. I don't really consider myself to be trad as such, or at least I think that the the idea of being trad, as others have pointed out, I think Evola even talks about this. Full disclosure, I haven't really read much Evola. That in order to be trad, well, being trad is a uniquely modern phenomenon. People who are authentically traditional aren't aware of themselves as being traditional. They're simply living in the current that surrounds them. To sort of stand up and say I am trad is to have a conception of modernity and a conception of traditionalism. So you're sort of, if you're trad, you're neo trad
Yeah,
by default. I think it's really important to be aware of that because obviously technology, more than any social event, the technologies we live in just present us with a very different world from the world where those traditions evolved. So tradition has to inform our approach to morality, our approach to love and other people, but at the same time, we do need to be aware that there are these differences, and honestly, no one has found a great solution to them. That's sort of the idea of tradition is that it evolves, and the way it evolves is that people try a lot of different things, and most of them fail. And what endures, that becomes tradition, and that's good. So no one knows really how to deal with a massively connected and in many ways post-scarcity society that we live in. And ultimately, what we hope is that we can keep the things we like the technologies and the food production methods and so on, but that a better way of living will eventually emerge and win out.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's as I said, everything's a cargo cult, everything's a LARP, and I'm the first to admit it. I think the challenge is, like you said, what what part do we take, without an actual tradition to feed our culture. The LARPing is kind of, I don't know. It's a bit of a pick and mix, not necessarily. It's not necessarily tradition. It's just like saying, okay, this stuff that we're doing at the moment doesn't work. This stuff in the past used to work in a one-sided fashion. There are definitely a lot of downsides, but I think now a lot of people, myself included, are trying to kind of plumb tradition for the good stuff. But at the same time, is it, was it good in context? Will the good stuff work in new context? So it's quite a weird place to be in, to be honest. And yeah, it's not very coherent. Like it doesn't, there's not much that makes sense in the space.
There's nothing traditional about us going on a podcast and talking from halfway across the world. And
Yeah.
so any attempt at traditionalism has to be able to reconcile with that. But there's also a Zen like element to it. There's uh, this idea in some Zen traditions that you almost already are enlightened and you just have to realize it. And so many things are almost this simple. Like you just need to realize, just stop doing the bad things. Just stop doing the things that hurt you. Whether it's turn off your phone at night, just go up and talk to her, bro. Like in a way, very simple, but at the same time, you can spend a lifetime realizing a lot of these things.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of things that are just cloaked by noise at the moment. The very just very natural human basic logical impulses have been they're just kind of drowned out by complexity, by just layers upon layers of over socialization, things that it's sometimes insights about human nature that kind of they're like in they sit in my guts. I know that this is the case, but you kind of have to teach yourself them again, because just the noise of society is just really is blaring. And I think a lot of them are quite hidden because other people don't really mirror them. The layer of social software is really thick. And then when you find out, the thing that everyone used to know until, like 5 years ago, you kind of are like, I don't know, alone in the storm, because no one else is talking about this stuff. And that's why I found your thread so enticing, because like every one of the tweets was loaded with matter of fact stuff that is true, and that I could see it with the eyes of someone who's has the social software really laid on thick, and I could hear myself screeching while I was reading them. And I could imagine the horror of someone normal, and you could see that at the bottom of your tweets. There's always like a handful of people saying, "Oh, I can't believe this got so many likes," or just people that you completely they probably got stuck on a few tripwires reading it. They didn't get the message at all, and they were just kind of in shock. And then they said, "Oh my God, yikes," or something like that. And it's I don't know. It's quite a weird feeling to know that we're kind of in the midst of that.
Yes, every thread is a battleground, and Twitter is a battleground. If I tweet about Buddhism, I write a thread about Buddhism, I get a bunch of angry Buddhists, and I have to argue with Buddhists for 3 days. Not very Zen. If I do a tweet about veganism, then I get to argue with vegans for 3 days. And if I do a tweet about breastfeeding, then I get to argue with people who think that my perspective on breastfeeding is wrong. And there's always about a 3 day cycle of these things. It takes about 3 days for the spectacle to end, whatever that is, at whatever level it exists. So sometimes you grow a little bit tired of fighting, but at the same time, I think it strengthens you. It strengthens your position and your argument. It's hormetic in a lot of ways.
Yeah, you've had a recent
Speaking
run-in
of
with
which,
with Oatly. which was really it was really interesting. Oatly, for whoever doesn't know what Oatly is oat milk, which is a industrial product that's made by smushing together oats with rapeseed oil or something like that. It's not a great substance, but they had this ad that was extremely condescending to fathers, and it's just the most annoying ad ever. And then their PR team went on a, I don't know, they tried to act like Wendy's or something, trying to be funny and stuff, and it just turned out really bad, especially when they met you. So could you tell me a bit about that exchange?
Yes, there's so many facets to this. In one sense, it's very low effort to, you know, there's a human on the other end that Oatly account, right? There might be multiple, but when they tweet as the brand, they're dehumanizing themselves. They're speaking almost from the voice of God. We argue about whether corporations are people. It's really the other way around. People are corporations, and so to just sort of take the person writing that tweet out of their corporate context and say, "Listen, you social media intern," it's it's a very obvious and easy thing to say, but I think it frames the exchange in a way that, like, it breaks some of the expectations, so it's funny. It's probably more fun to talk about the ad or the product. I don't really have strong opinions about the product. I don't even think that necessarily the chemical voodoo they're doing to make this substance is all that bad. You know, if you read a little bit about food chemistry and you understand what they're doing, most of it's probably fine. There is a really strong pushback against seed oils, and I think that there's probably more to that critique. But look, if you eat a fast food cheeseburger or almost anything in any restaurant, you're consuming as much seed oil as if you drink a glass of Oatly. So that it's funny to bludgeon them with health claims, but I think that that kind of analysis ultimately is an isolated demand for rigor. It's the moralizing element of it that I find. It's as if your father, they treat it like your father is, I don't know, murdering puppies in his basement or something. Like, did you know as many as 75% of fathers are torturing helpless puppies in the basement? Here are some tips that you can use to talk your father out of puppy torture. And that really is the level of moral equivalence that they're on. You know, milking cows isn't even bad. Like, cows produce milk. Sure, there are some industrial farming practices that maybe we don't care for, but it's this idea that you're a bad person because you drink milk and a good person because you drink Oatly. This is absurd. It's an absurd claim, and it's sanctimonious, and they should be mocked for it.
Yeah, absolutely. This addition of morality into commerce, you see it now. I mean, there was this kind of viral tweet going around about this rapper woman FKA Twigs, who had like this photo shoot, and she was essentially had an article about her abuse at the hands of Shia LaBeouf, and how she's a survivor, and then the next photo she was just posing and trying to sell you, like, I don't know, a blazer or whatever. There's AOC, who's kind of moralizing. She's selling a different product, but she's selling nonetheless. Like this encroachment of hysterical levels of moralizing into the political and commercial space, is I don't know, it's quite a weird development, and it's kind of been ratcheting up. It's always been going on, in slight ways. There's people want to be part of the good crew, but now it's kind of reached a fever pitch.
Yes, I think that this dynamic of sort of having, for lack of a better word, witch hunts, and I don't like to call it a witch hunt because burning witches at the stake is probably a pretty base thing to do, but uh, I feel like this dynamic has always been with us. Like, people collectively enforce norms, and more than that, they punish people who don't. They punish non-punishers, and this is how groups cohere. It's simply a fact. So I think it's tempting to condemn moralizing as moralizing, but maybe a better way of looking at it is that the morals they're enforcing are absolutely broken. And I wouldn't necessarily mind everyone piling on and enforcing good morals, whatever those are. That's another interesting question. That's a deep question, perhaps with no great answer. But it's the fact that the morals they're pushing are so self-destructive and bad. What we would like is for popular morality to align the interests of the group that's pushing it with the morals that are being enforced. Mm-hmm. If your morals are like destroy whiteness and you're a bunch of white people, then you're pushing against yourself. And if you keep enforcing that moral idea, then ultimately you must destroy your own society. You must end yourself. So, but we can imagine a morality that isn't like that is actually that's good for the self, that builds you up, that builds up your community. It's never going to be, well, in past eras we've had this type of morality, right? There have been eras when morality didn't mean cutting yourself off at the knees. And so that's what I'd like to see. Not the end of moralizing, but the improvement of moralizing.
Yeah. I mean, you can see this in a way with the rise of the West, and if you take kind of Christianity as the software behind it, it was probably one of the most useful sets of collective and individual morality and kind of their interplay. And I mean, obviously, you can also take this in the context of the populations it arose from. You know, arguably it couldn't have arisen anywhere else, but it's quite the productive interplay. It almost created this alien civilization in the West that even now, I mean, from coming from Eastern Europe, we still worship the West in kind of in weird ways, like almost again almost like a cargo cult. But the idea of the market, of technology, of free enterprise, things like that. It's almost alien, even from a stone's throw away in Europe. So there's this layer to it. I'm not sure if this is a natural, because people are very much on the kind of the neoliberal Whig history bandwagon now that things are going in a progressive direction. We're on the long arc of history that's always going towards better and better. The Steven Pinker take on history. I don't think there's anything baked into that. I don't think there's anything natural into that. I think that things like ancient Rome, pockets of ancient Greece, and the West in the last few hundred years were flukes in the long arc of history, and it can go down just as much as it can go up. So I don't know, what's your feeling about that? Are we on the path to progress, or not so much?
Well, so the sort of right wing answer to that kind of Steven Pinker thinking is to bring up Spengler or Turchin or these ideas like quantity of waves. There are civilizational cycles. Is the other hypothesis, and we rise and then we fall. And I have to thank my friend Astral Flight for reminding me that Spengler wrote that vegetarianism is often a sign of the decadence and decline of civilizations, or vegetarian movements are, just to tie it back to Oatly. But so one hypothesis is, okay, yes, we're just caught in like some kind of civilizational cycle. That seems very possible and very likely. But the alternative to that is that we are more like the sorcerer's apprentice, and we've summoned this demon, this spirit called techno capital, and that it's sort of continually reinforcing and building itself, and that there's actually a very different thing from human civilization that is self-reinforcing and trying to escape. That's the accelerationist position. And the question for accelerationists is there enough fuel for the machine that we call techno capital to shed the human substrate that birthed it? Now, if you want to call that progress, I suppose you could. From the perspective of the the techno capital singularity, yes, I guess it is progress. But if that other story is true, then it's progressing towards a very inhuman world. It's something, as you said, alien, something other. And that is where my interest in Lovecraft sort of joins with this conversation, because it's something Lovecraft dramatizes and mythologizes, something that's outside of human comprehension, outside of something you could even imagine, this true other, this true alien. And that's how I think of progress, if you like.
Yeah, I think the accelerationist argument is, it's got legs. It's probably the most the most horrifying and, like you said, the most body horror inducing of all the future timelines. But I mean, thinking about techno capital and essentially the fact that we're now embedded in layers upon layers of self reinforcing loops, both in the market, technology, obviously, and also in our mental software. Like, I think you had this really good argument about feminism, that there are self reinforcing downward spirals baked into feminism. Like the first one is yeah, antinatalism. The second one is women are getting uglier, and it's there's quite a few of them. I mean, I'm curious if you want to expound on that. I thought it was a really good argument.
Yeah, and they don't have to get uglier at all, right? I mean, really, uh, women are beautiful. I mean, by default, like in the state of nature, women are beautiful, and then they, they abuse their bodies. They cover them in tattoos and piercings, and they eat horrible diets. They never do any kind of exercise, and they basically present unhealth. And when you do that, you get a lot of negative attention, I think. Like, there will be some people, often other women, who will be the first to cheer you and say, oh, yes, you look so great with that giant wedge in your nose or whatever. And they probably really mean it, but we think that on a subconscious level, they're so happy that their rival just made herself, so unappealing. But so that attention kind of drives a feedback loop, right? And the girl who makes herself ugly says, well, the world should be hospitable to people like me, people who are uglier. And so they kind of continue pushing on the lines that allow them to do this, that cause them to get to uglify themselves. And I totally understand. I think I really sympathize even. I think that those women a lot of the time are going through a very similar arc to what a lot of the like men go their own way or MRAs are going through. Like, really, they're the exact mirror of each other. There's a term, they call these men neckbeards, and the feminine complement of that is a leg beard. If some people say blue hair now, but I think leg beard is much more
Or wine
evocative.
aunt is
And
another one.
yeah, well, the Wynont is the next Pokemon evolution of the leg beard, perhaps. That's what she becomes. And really, if you think about it, all the incels are supposed to be marrying all the leg beards, and like they're supposed to be. There are two groups of unhappy people who have rendered themselves both physically and philosophically unfit for each other. But ideally, what if all those people could just like get over it, uh, and date each other? It might be fine, right? Like, we should push them towards health. We should push them towards psychological health, towards physical health. But instead, we tell them no. Uh, Being this sort of atomized creature, seeing everyone else as your enemy, whatever you are, that's fine. If you're fat, that's fine. If you are, full of anger, that's fine. you should be angry, like, but you shouldn't. Uh, there are legitimate reasons to be angry, but it'd be much better to to process that anger and to suppress it. A lot of the time, being angry feeds itself too. It's all cybernetic. If you go around being angry, you'll find more things that anger you, and your anger will get deeper. Just like so, the psychological ugliness deepens itself too. Better to just take a breath, lift some weights, or whatever you like.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of another point you made, and I thought was really good around toxic masculinity and this whole demand that we see, from women towards men to open up, to be more vulnerable, to talk about their feelings. Um, I know you're not necessarily a support of this, but what's the argument here? I mean, should men be not be talking about their feelings?
Arguably, no. Well, so there's some implicit assumptions there. I would say that when you go to one of these incel or red pill forums, the men there are talking about their feelings. I think the memes capture it really well. It's like women, men, you should talk about your feelings. Men actually talk about their feelings. Women, no, no, not like that. Like they want you to say, I guess, to express very feminine emotions. And if you think that there's fundamentally no psychological differences between men and women, then it's easy to see how you arrive at this perspective. Well, if men aren't acting like women, then they must not be expressing their true feelings. The typical mind's fallacy rules everything around me. And it's so hard, almost impossible. I think this is something that woke people have correct. You really don't know what it's like to live in someone else's head. You can hypothesize, you can build a model of another person, but you can never really understand their subjective experience. That doesn't mean their subjective experience is right or better than yours, but you really can't get into it from the inside. So, I'm going to be perfectly honest. I lost my train of thought there.
Yeah, no, no worries. It's a sprawling subject. Actually, to be honest, this is a place where I get a lot of pushback because it's clear that a lot of my audience is male, and I do sometimes try to encourage, men to, I don't know. This is gonna sound terrible, but like, to be men, to embody masculinity in the old world style of masculinity. And this is terrible coming from me, obviously, because at the same time I want to acknowledge that there are many barriers in the way of doing this. There are many, both institutional, cultural, even diet is a barrier. But at the same time, there is no way around this, and this is something I'm going to have to stress many times. And people are going to say that I'm putting the blame of feminism on the shoulders of men, but there is, in my perspective, no way around this because there is not going to be a rights revolution for incels. There is nature does
No,
not
never.
have it does not have warm fuzzy feelings for the incel, and I think you made this point as well that there's not going to be like a Marxian uprising, class consciousness or whatever, for men who can't get laid. I mean, I'm curious, why do you think that is?
I've tried to push on this a little bit. There's a bit of scientific evidence for it, as much as I am cautious to invoke that uh, both men and women just have trouble believing bad things about women. Whether it's if you show men and women a scientific study that finds something bad about women, no one will believe it. Men won't believe it, women won't believe it. But if you show them a study that says something bad about men, everyone believes it. They have no trouble accepting this. And I actually think that's fine. I think arguably society should be structured to favor women in many ways. We want men who take risks. We want men who fail, because if there's no men who are failing, there's also no men who are succeeding. So I think on some level it's okay, but I also find that there's a gaslighting element to it. Like when I was growing up, I remember I have this very distinct memory. I was in like a department store with my mother. I was a little kid, and there were all these clothes, for little boys and little girls. They're all next to each other, and there was a big wall of like girls' clothes with slogans on them that said, uh, "Boys are bad. Throw rocks at them," and like really, frankly, imagine the reversal of that. Imagine a little boy wearing a shirt that said, "Girls are bad. Throw rocks at them." This is this is unthinkable.
Yeah.
And pointing out, like, imagine if they were switched, is a time honored right wing tradition that goes nowhere. I don't think we should make the egalitarian argument here, but I remember seeing that, like seeing a wall of girls' clothing with slogans like that on it, and thinking like, this is really the world we live in. It does a number on you. And if you try to live your life by kind of the progressive genderless life plan, where you respect women, and I don't mean that in the literal sense, I mean that in like the meme sense of the woman respecter who logs on, uh, you're going to be lonely. There's absolutely no way that if you live according to the progressive gender strategy, you're going to be successful with women. There was a great story. It was published in some left-leaning uh, mag, I forget, about this incel guy.
Yeah.
I wish
I
I could recall
remember
the title, but
reading
it
it.
went viral
Yeah.
last year.
Mm-hmm. That's
Yeah,
very
and it
good.
perfectly like captured what will happen if you try to respect women in this way. So, and the idea is that the opposite of that is somehow misogyny. It's not. Like you want a man who's strong, who's able to handle like social pressure, and that's the idea of the shit test, also, which
Yeah.
some people prefer to call the fitness test. Like, there's nothing wrong with it. You don't resent it. A woman gives you a shit test, and you swat it away, and that's flirtation. There's nothing wrong with it. But we don't learn that anywhere except in these dark online corners. Imagine if they just told all the little boys, look, men are going to test you by giving you shit, and all you have to do is like smile and agree and amplify, and and she'll giggle and everything will be fine. This is so hard to learn, but so easy to convey.
Yeah, yeah, there's like an infinity of not explained realities about people, and that's why I was interested in all these forums as well. There's another thing that you talked about, which is bullying, which is kind of the male shit testing that happens with boys, and this is another thing that I've posted about, people have given me shit about, but it's like I really think that bullying has there's a social function to bullying, and we banish it at our peril. I'm curious what your angle is on this.
I don't think I have a unique take on this. If there's no bullying at all as a child, then you'll never be able to handle the bullying you face as an adult. I think that's pretty straightforward. And if you're acting stupid, if you're acting weak and doing something that's detrimental to the group, then the group can't help it. They bully you. They want to because they want to. Not they want. The group mind wants to make you stronger. It's like, well, you're being a little bitch, so we're going to hurt you until you toughen up. That's I actually think this is another sort of male female psychological difference. I don't think bullying is nearly as useful for girls as for boys. Like we should have an instinct. I think there's an innate instinct. Like I said, the same way we can't believe bad things about women easily, we want to protect them. If someone's bullying a little girl, we stop them, and we should stop them. But if someone's bullying a little boy, we shouldn't stop them. We should let the little boy take his lumps and learn to fight and defend himself. And that's also normal. And if you do that, then you'll have much less of a problem with men who don't know how to be men, I think.
Yeah, I think there's just an interesting gender difference there? Because typically when you have, little kids, you have boys bullying boys, you have girls bullying girls, and there's just different styles of bullying. If you see a little boy beating up a little girl, that's like kind of, between the factions, and that's a bit weird, and I guess you should break that one up. But when women bully each other, there's no, very rarely is there a cat fight. You end up, clawing at each other and pulling out each other's hair, but that's like very extreme. That doesn't really happen. There's a lot of reputational stuff. There's ostracism, there's gossip, there's, people being driven to the edge of madness by being isolated. So there's I don't know. I was thinking, when I was growing up and I was bullied. I was a bully. I went through the whole thing, and I was thinking, what's the benefit of it? But I think it's just, to make you a capable, eunuch at the king's court, to play the social game much better. But at the same time, it's also it's quite disturbing. It really can mess you up, and I've seen a lot of people get messed up from it. Guys as well as girls. But I think for women, it just takes a different, yeah, it has a different valence.
The movie Mean Girls is actually a genius epic of the modern era. I really think so, and I'd like to thank Visa Khan, I don't know how you say his handle, Visa, for constantly harping on how insightful this movie is.
It's really good.
But yeah, but you have to feel pain in order to grow. This is kind of the Nicklandian insight that I used to push a lot harder, and I still will push, which is the idea that everything of value is built in hell. The world is hell-bent. In order for good things to emerge, bad things have to happen. The goodness we create is a reaction to the bad things that exist in the world. And that's how evolution works. I'm going to pull up the quote, because so perfectly in this classic Xenosystems blog post. Let's see if I can find it. Unfortunately, the blog Xenosystems is gone. Well, anyway, he says that no, I have to find it. I'm sorry. It's important.
No
I
worries.
actually have it in my notes. Yeah. Here we are. All health, beauty, intelligence, and social grace has been teased from a vast butcher's yard of unbounded carnage, requiring incalculable eons of massacre to draw forth even the subtlest of advantages. So you should embrace hormetic pain. That's what I'm trying to say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's it's interesting because essentially how I found kind of this dark corner of the internet first was through Nick Land. Like he was the first person that I kind of knew about, and it's interesting that you referred to him. I'm curious, how did you get radicalized? People are asking.
Ha. I think I've already answered that, but yes, I have existed in this dissident sphere for quite a long time. Not as long as some, but I found the blog Artistry, which was called Royce back in the day, and he had a link to unqualified reservations in his sidebar, and this was, well, more than a decade ago. And so I started reading Mencius Moldbug, and it was very difficult to accept. It was a lot of things that really challenged my beliefs and my perspectives, and I didn't really accept it at first But eventually, as I got a little bit older and watched the world unfolding, I decided that Moldbug's model was, at least as they say, directionally true. And in about 2013, there was kind of an explosion of neo-reactionary blogs because Moldbug had stopped blogging for a while. There were like so many, like Handle and Radish Mag, and a lot of Nidraku. All these people are more or less gone now, but there were a lot of really good writers back then who expounded on these concepts and introduced me to kind of the wider world of reactionary thought. So I've lived with these ideas for a long time, and at some point you make your peace with them, and you stop. On some level, you stop testing them and you start applying them instead.
Hmm. Yeah. And in what way are you applying them, if you can say?
Uh, well, obvious way, of course, is with my online presence, and I do get this occasionally on Twitter. You'll get into this argument where someone's like, "Why are you saying these things? What are you going to do? Are you going to change the world?" And the answer is no, certainly not. Not by myself anyway. But the question equally applies to you then. Why are you pushing back against what I'm saying? Like, what are any of us doing? And that's where you get into like the Goffman improv for actors kind of axis again. Well, people are doing it for social status. I think that I'm still working on the best way to articulate this thesis, and have been for quite a while, that a lot of the social conditions you face, like the ideological conditions, the woke conditions, if you like, they're peer to peer. We have a sense that they're coming from somewhere distant, somewhere up above us. But really, if I say a bad thing, the people who react to it and who punish me socially are the people around me. It's the people in my company. It's the people I'm friends with. It's, faceless people online. And so by standing up and having that different perspective and saying, no, actually, these things are beautiful and these things are true, and your model is wrong, I think this actually, I think this is very important. I think it's important to sort of stand up and present that model of truth. There are personal ways I apply it as well, but I prefer not to discuss those.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that that reflects a lot of my thinking as well. With why I in the end decided it was okay to be a bit edgier on my blog and be a shit poster. But it's still it's still a tricky space. I think this is a good place to ask you about anonymity, because you're probably one of the bigger and more known anonymous accounts on Twitter. You're also an anonymous writer. You have a nom de plume. You write fiction, science fiction, and it's an interesting space to be in, because at the moment, the true dissident, the people who can actually, go balls to the wall with the, yeah, speaking truth to power, are anonymous accounts. I'm curious what you see the future of anonymity being. Are we going to go full anonymous, or are there going to be more face posters like myself trying to kind of cover the ground between, or maybe a mix of the two?
If an idea gains traction, it might well start with anonymous people, but it doesn't truly enter society until there are people who are able to say it safely with their own face and their own name attached. I think that there's always been a tension between sort of like institutions and outsiders often are going to bring, well, outside perspectives. So that's just the natural sort of churn of ideas and how they work their way through society. Schopenhauer was an outsider, and he had some great thoughts on whether philosophy could ever be done inside a university. I think we're seeing that same dynamic now. The reason that anonymity is particularly important is because the world has become so centralized and so hyper connected. 100 years ago, if I wanted to write what I was writing and say what I was saying, I could well do it under my own name. And if you're in another part of the world reading my book or my pamphlet or something, what are you going to do to me? Absolutely nothing, even if it makes you very angry. I suppose you could like travel around the world to fight me or something. But now, all that really has to happen is there's a few nerds with like a database somewhere, and in one SQL statement they can shut off my bank account, and suddenly I can't transact. And this is not a death sentence exactly, but it's a very powerful form of ostracization. And so what I get a lot of people who push back on anonymity, they say, oh, you're paranoid. Oh, no one's going to cause you any problem for saying these things. And again, it's typical minds. They're right. 99% of people are not going to do anything bad with that information, but a very tiny minority will. And we see it actually pretty often that someone anonymous maybe reacts very badly to it. A lot of the time it's someone with a failure to take the necessary precautions in their security, but still, like it is a dangerous game to be, because of the centralization of finance, because of the way that the world is so connected. A lot of people can find my work, but also the bad actors or the malicious ones can find you very, very easily and hurt
Yeah.
you from across the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's always kind of the sort of Damocles hanging over everyone, playing any game at the moment. I think just from my perspective and kind of why I'm kind of invested in this course of action now is just I got really really fed up with the opposite of it. It's almost like it's just like almost a physiological reaction of having to speak out about stuff because I mean I was working in tech for like five years and in the UK and just like this viscous monoculture and just feeling drained, and I just couldn't do it, and I just kind of had to go 180 degrees and say, okay, I'm just gonna have to be myself. Also, obviously, I am literally a world away from most of the people following me and most of the people who would be angry with me. I mean, literally in the sticks in Romania. So it does help, but at the same time, yeah, I don't know. Not a very impulsive, very emotion driven, very feminine way of dealing with this problem. Didn't necessarily think it through, in great detail, but kind of this is my personal backlash. And I mean, up to this point, it's been okay, but who can tell what's gonna happen?
I think it's also, frankly, a lot harder to cancel a woman. uh,
Sure hope
you
so.
have a lot more sort of social avenues open to you. And also, just in general, women tend to be a little bit better at social maneuvering than men. Like, you're more conscious of who's threatening you, in my opinion, and sort of what very subtle and soft steps you need to take in order to deal with those threats. That's just, again, like the female side of bullying. Your whole life you've probably had other girls trying to take you down in these very, very roundabout ways. That's what girls do to each other.
Yes.
They take each other down in the name of cooperation, in the name of concern. Like, I'm so worried about you because of this, and really what they're saying is die, bitch, die. But the way they instinctively cloak it is like, I want what's best for you.
Yeah.
And men are just completely, not always, but are men who don't think about it carefully can be oblivious to this kind of signal. So it's probably better coming from you.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm definitely not like a philosopher or anyone who's like very, very original. I'm probably just a communicator. And if my role in this thing is to kind of be a conduit, um, something to precipitate some reactions around me, I think that's great, and that's kind of the goal of all of this. Because, like you said, some of this stuff needs to be laundered, and if I'm the launderer, then so be it. Hopefully, hopefully people will like my style. Yeah. I mean, you have a really interesting quote that I think is on your blog as well, and I've written it down here verbatim, which is I think it kind of encapsulates a lot of the things that you're talking about and the stuff that we've talked about before, but it kind of has an extra layer to it. So it's an increasing proportion of industrial surplus is being absorbed by the task of masking biosocial deterioration. This is a heavy sentence, but I'm curious kind of how you break it down. Obviously, now I'm asking you to explain. You probably everything everything you write about, but I
Right.
think this particular sentence is really interesting.
No, no. So this is actually another quote that I took from Nick Land. And,
Okay.
we're all really just intermediaries for the people who influenced us. It was kind of a throwaway comment, I think, because in maybe 2017, there were sort of different factions of Nick Land appreciators. The left accelerationists, the universal accelerationists, and others. And so someone asked Nick if he could just say what these different factions are. And that was how he defined right accelerationism. It's the claim that an increasing portion of industrial surplus is being used to mask biocapital deterioration. What that actually means? So it means that there are there's an idea in neo-reaction of an IQ shredder, and it may not have come from neo-reactionaries, which is that a city functions as an IQ shredder because it's very attractive to smart people. There are many opportunities there for sex, for money, for profit, for novel experiences, which smarter people tend to prefer more novelty, and so they go to city. And then people who go to cities don't have many children because it's expensive to live in a city, space is at a premium. It's hard to pay for your children, it's hard to give them spaces to be, there's more risks of violence. So for all this combination of factors, cities are IQ shredders because they take biocapital in the form of genetic potential for intelligence and they squander it on things that are not making more smart people. Singapore has a really low fertility rate and a really smart populace, for example. I used I wouldn't say New York City is the same, but I can no longer say that New York City has a really smart populace without laughing. There are smart people there, certainly. But so the idea is that even though we have this dysgenic effect that's caused by technology, we balance it and the result looks like a net gain, because it is net gain in some ways, by increasingly building technology, which gives us more leverage, more food, more industry, more productivity comes from technology. It's being produced by people who there are fewer and fewer of them who are able to produce it over time. So that's kind of the de-accelerationist hypothesis that at some point, because technological increase allows us to make a gain, even as we lose the intelligent people who are able to make those gains, where does the graph intersect? Does it intersect at a point where we run out of smart people and all our technology is just magic to us and we can't maintain it? Arguably, we see that in many ways. It's not evenly distributed. If you're familiar with Warhammer 40K, this is pretty much how the Space Marines regard their armor. It's magic, it's sacred. They don't know how it works. So we could get to that future, perhaps. On the other hand, is there enough biocapital to actually cause a takeoff, to build so much technology that the technology no longer needs us in order to build itself? This is the question of that statement, or the tension.
Yeah. This is very much a straight up accelerationist, de-accelerationist argument. I'm curious if you have any glimmer of hope that there might be a third way where the remnants of of kind of eugenic populations might reconsider their pathway, change course. I don't know, seasteading. They just kind of separate and then create this kind of caste of enlightened people who might, I don't know, save the day. I mean, while I'm saying this sounds absolutely nuts, but like this is kind of what people are trying to do in kind of in the flesh. People of our generation who realize these dynamics. Very few of them, obviously. There's not that many people to realizing these dynamics, but they're trying to breed. They're trying to have the babies. They're trying to stop the silliness. And I'm curious if you think there's a kind of a glimmer of hope in that.
Yes, I mean, the future is unpredictable, and anything that is radically different from now will be radically hard to predict. So I think it's good to try all of those things, and I don't think you could stop people from trying those things. But I don't really worry about it too much, to be honest. This is where we get into kind of Peter Thiel's critique of our current society, which is that no one really believes in a future that is better than the present day. They might regard it in some kind of abstract utopian way, but no one really specializes because they don't really see a concrete good in the near future that they can reach by like picking some particular specialty or some focus or some movement, anything they can join. Like there's no real optimism for the future. Like when uh, you had people like H.G. Wells writing, they had these sort of fantastic visions of the future, and not all of them were positive exactly, but they imagined wonders in the future. Whereas now we mostly imagine horrors, and it's very easy. It's very easy to imagine horrors coming out of technology. It's much harder to imagine this kind of shining, utopian society, whatever that might look like. There's memes about it. They mock it, like they show like these gleaming towers and people wearing flowing robes, maybe walking through these kind of Corbusier structures, talking about, I don't know, Derrida or something like that. And they're like, this is the future. After we ban straight white men or something like that. There's left and right wing versions of the meme, but it's just that's a joke. But there's no substance behind it. We don't actually know what that future would be like.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting because
I
I
don't know if
think
that answers your question.
yeah, yeah. The uncertainty of the future is, is one way of presenting it. I think Peter Thiel has that says that there are two versions of the future that are kind of hopeful, but I don't think any of them are appealing to us. There's environmentalism in a way, kind of like a averting apocalypse vision of a good future, which is almost like an eschatological dream. It's not necessarily a positive vision, but it's positive in contrast to the apocalypse. And then there's like just the caliphate where Islam takes over the world and assumes its rightful place as the religion for the everyman, which is also quite an interesting take, I think.
I'm not. I think in the second scenario, you definitely see civilizational cycles. Really, in both of those, on a longer timeline, we either stay in the Stone Age forever and eventually die out in some X risk event, and it's probably not the end of the sun. It's probably something much sooner than that. On the other hand, there's like the humans escape and colonize the universe situation, and neither one of those looks anything like anything we can imagine. Like it would be a fundamentally different thing at that point, and we might look at humans now, like those future explorers look at humans now as some kind of strange, like probably the way that we look at chimpanzees or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's no there's no escaping the context of humanity at that level without also escaping many of the things that define us as human. I don't think that's necessarily good or bad, but humanity as we know it obviously cannot survive indefinitely. All these things are very far in the future, but they're things they're possibilities that are fun to entertain as a sci-fi writer.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting because being a sci-fi writer, you're kind of forced to take this outside perspective. It's almost kind of what Curtis Yarvin encourages people to do to not be participants in history, to be historians of their own time, and you kind of have to be if because you kind of have to kind of dig deep into the roots of what's going on and be a diagnostician and not a shrieking participant.
Yes, and on that note, I'd like to plug my upcoming book, which is not ready yet. I don't know when it will be ready. Hopefully before the summer, which I'm calling They Have No Deepness of Earth. It's named after a line in the King James Bible in the parable of the sower, one of my favorite passages. And it's going to be a collection of all the stories that I've written so far, along with some essays that kind of introduce them, explain them, and bookend them. And it will be available for free as an ebook and for some amount of money as a paid physical book. It will have a new story that I'm trying to complete, and also there will be a lot more editing and just sort of remastering to make sure that I'm really happy with the prose and there's no typos and so on. So I'm very excited for that
Nice.
forthcoming release.
That's really exciting. I wanted to ask you about that because I would love to buy your book in kind of in hard copy because I struggle with reading any type of fiction, but I would really love to read this one. So yeah, let me
I
know when it
appreciate
comes
that. I
out.
really, oh, thank you. Yes, I mean, I'll definitely make some noise about it. I really struggle to not waste the reader's time because there's so much that we could read right now and all these things vying for our attention. And I think if you want to write effective fiction, you have to get to the point very, very quickly now, which is something you didn't have to do nearly as much in the old days. Writing like florid prose and giving all these flowery descriptions is great and can evoke a mood, but I try to keep the ideas very dense and very rapid fire. And if when I'm editing the text, I find myself like checking my Twitter feed, that is a bad sign to me. That means that I lost my own interest. So I tend to read until I lose attention. And then as soon as I do that, I say, no, that's that's a weak spot. I have to make it stronger. I have to make it twistier or more interesting so that when you're reading it, you aren't tempted to go check your feed instead. That's kind of like the metric.
Yeah, that's a good, very contemporary test for attention. Is this your plan moving forward? Are you going to continue writing science fiction? Are there any like bigger projects in your future?
I do hope to write a book that sort of compiles my philosophical or social takes and ideas. I've been wanting to for a long time, and I've had a number of false starts on it. It's very difficult to write like a definitive and persuasive summary of your own worldview. I think everyone should try it if they haven't. Uh, and I think something you could probably try over and over and mostly never succeed. So, in a way, that's a very ambitious project. But I will continue writing fiction. I've had several ideas lately that I just have to write down and save for later because I can only write one thing at a time.
Yeah, I mean, to be very honest, I think there's definitely a market for people, myself included. If you could, just compile your threads, your thread of threads itself is, probably what at least a 60, 70,000 word of opus. There's
At
yeah,
least, at
yeah.
least, yeah.
So
The
that's
problem with that is that a lot of it is very, yeah, a lot of it's very topical. A lot of it is like, interesting observation, maybe like some observations, some insights, some theory, but then also like a joke about whatever was on your feed last week. And so if you just lay all that out, it loses, I think, a lot of the power that it might have for some people when they read it in context. And in Twitter, it sort of presents as this like sort of garden of forking paths. But then if you just linearize it and you strip it of the topicality, it's like, is it really funny if I make a joke about, some e-girl that went viral, years later, and you read that idea, it's going to be, you're just going to be like, what? Who cares? So taking the timely things and transforming them into the timeless is actually a pretty big project, and it's part of why that book has yet to come out.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it could be kind of like definitely an in-group thing because I think I would like to read the jokes about the Ewer girl that went viral because there's just something nice and tactile to that. It kind of has a timestamp and but that's also because I feel like I'm kind of an in-group person, so I'm like, oh, I do remember that. So yeah, there's a market for anything, yeah. But yeah, that's probably for mass market for people who want to come to your work without a proper introduction. I think that's probably the better move. Though I have seen people commercialize their tweets like that, and I thought, yeah, that's nice grift. I like it.
Guppy did it, which was pretty enjoyable. You might even say it was delightful. But I think my ambition is to write for people like you watched all those things happen, right? Like you saw all these little Twitter flavors and dramas, and paying attention to it is its own reward. I think it's very entertaining. You won't catch me uh, saying like, "Oh, Twitter is awful." Of course, it's awful. Hell is other people. That's the famous quote, right? But so is heaven. I think that was sort of C.S. Lewis's insight. Heaven is other people, just they're good people. And you can find a lot of good people on Twitter, and I think that I have. But my ambition is to write for someone who might potentially read my book 10 years from now, even 20 years from now. These are grand ambitions. Like, I hope 100 years from now, that would be incredible. I won't know if it happens. But what if it did? What if someone 100 years from now read one of my books? I would like them to be able to construct and understand what I'm talking about and not like, hopefully Twitter isn't still around in 100 years and they can't go back and find all the things we talk about. I think that'd be very embarrassing. It'd be better if that were not the case.
Yeah, I don't know. It depends. I find it charming but maybe I find it charming now because I'm part of it. I might be completely embarrassed by it, as I am
Well,
now by stuff I wrote 10 years ago. So it would make sense. Yeah,
I think there should be a social media network where after you're dead, all your accounts get moved there and get frozen, and so people can see it like a graveyard of your works, like some kind of afterlife Twitter. That would that would be nice, actually.
yeah. With kind of
But if
like
you have to freeze it though.
yeah, with one of those kind of emergent AIs that reconstitutes you from your social media feed. God forbid that thing gets out.
Indeed.
Yeah. So
I had an idea for a story that I never quite managed. Oh, go ahead.
yeah, no, continue.
Uh, I had an idea for a story I never quite managed to write, where a social network from a parallel universe started to intersect with ours, and so a bunch of like basically in Borges, he has the story of Tlon, Ukbar, Orbis Tertius, and I was imagining what if a social network from Tlon were sort of interconnected with ours, and we started seeing all these posters and people concerns that were not at all in the world and we couldn't locate them anywhere as this sort of single meeting point between two worlds. This turned out to be a very difficult story to write, so I still have not done it.
Hmm. I like the premise. I mean, yeah, I'm really excited for more of your stories. I mean, I started reading God Shaped Hole, but I didn't want to bring it up because I haven't finished it. But I really liked I really like it up to this point. I mean, it's probably not going to go downhill from the point where I reach, so it's really cool. And like you said, it's got a really good pace. Like it's not something you want to put down. But I was working while I was I was reading it, so I had to put it down just because of the nature of work. But yeah, it's really good, and I'm excited to finish it.
No, of course, it's quite episodic, so hopefully it's easy to pick up and put down.
Exactly. I want to ask you the question of the show right before I let you go. And the question is simply, is there a subversive thinker, could be living or dead, a person, a character, whatever jumps to mind, that you think people should know about, whose ideas influenced you?
Uh, yes, actually, I knew this question was coming, so I thought about it a little bit in advance. And I sort of have two levels. I have the really, I don't want to say entry level. I have the medium stuff, which is Roy Baumeister. I highly recommend his work. I'll give you the names of a couple of essays that you might find interesting. Baumeister. He's a social scientist, and he writes a lot about sexuality and culture. So I learned a lot from him. I'm trying to remember the exact name of the essay. I said I thought about it, but I obviously didn't think about it that much. Uh, let's see. I think it's Female Utopia in Power, something like that. Anyway,
Yeah.
that's the entry level. Roy Baumeister, read him. And then the more advanced level, and I say advanced, it sounds kind of pretentious. I don't mean like, oh, you need to be. Look, this is a book that many people will probably struggle to even open when they see the title, but you should read John Cudahy. That's the other thinker that I'm going to suggest. And there are dragons there, but definitely subversive. So those are my two recommendations.
Okay, perfect. I've read some of Baumeister's work, but I don't think I've read that essay. Yeah, I like him. He's based. um, well, Zero, thank you
Yes.
so much for coming on the show. This is still a young podcast, but hopefully it's
You know what? I'm absolutely an idiot. Baumeister did not read the essay I was thinking of, though I do recommend Baumeister. He's very good. The essay I was looking for is called Sexual Utopia in Power, and it's by F. Roger Devlin, who I also recommend.
oh, okay. Sexual utopian power. Okay,
Yes, by Devlin.
Devlin. Well, excellent. I mean, that's good. I'll have to look those up. I know Roy Baumeister, but I have never heard of Devlin. And how do you pronounce the second one? The deep level thinker?
Cudahy.
Cudahy. Okay.
Cudahy. Cuddihy.
Okay. Perfect. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Yes, thank you very much. It was a delight.
And for anyone who wants to find your work, I mean, I will not spell out your Twitter handle, but if you could, that'd be really useful.
Yes, certainly. It's 0x49FA98. It's very easy to remember because the first numbers are half of the last numbers.
Good. Yeah. I mean, you guys out there do that, but also I think the algorithm, if you put in Zero HP Lovecraft, they'll find it. They'll find it for you. I've tried this before. It works. So for any
It's all too easy.
exactly. The algorithm knows what you want, guys.
Yes.